Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Hassan Labaskahni. I'm joined as always by my co-presenter and co-founder of Islamicity, Anwar Jitam. And today we're going to speak about the scholars that have visited our shores recently. Sheikh Omar Suleiman, Imam Omar Suleiman from the United States was here. We've had some illustrious guests also from Yemen, from Tarim, visiting us. Sheikh Mus'ab bin Found being one of them, and also a local South African brother, Afrikaner brother. I believe his name is Abu Bakr Engelbrecht. Uh, they've visited our shores recently. So this has I personally feel there's been a mixed welcome. Some people are very excited. The most of South African Muslims seem to be very excited by having such a international personality visiting us. Someone whose nasa'ih and whose talks we've depended upon heavily in Ramadan. Many of us listened to Sheikh Omar Suleiman's talks on Yaqeen Institute during Ramadan. But there's also been some backlash by some sections of the South African Muslim community against having scholars such as Imam Omar Suleiman in South Africa and platforming them. So what we're going to speak about a bit today is, are our South African Muslim organizations welcoming enough and accommodative enough of international scholars? Or do we perhaps need to introspect a bit and think about how we want to go about things in terms of being part of an international ummah?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think this is a very interesting topic about how do we, as a South African Muslim community, how do we receive international guests, be they ulama, be they Muslim thinkers, or just well-known individuals within the ummah currently, and how do we host them? Within recent years, what I've been seeing, my personal observations, when I stand for correction, is that there's always, a quarter of society that perhaps disagrees with certain individuals visiting our shores. And everyone has a right to their disagreement, but there has to be a way in which we voice our disagreement. And we also have to respect the fact that not everybody is going to agree with us. So perhaps, a visiting scholar from will appeal to one segment of our society, and another visiting scholar appeals to another segment of society. And people in between just simply have the opportunity of choosing whether they're going to attend, any of the events that are arranged for those visiting scholars. And I feel it's really a question, for example, does the South African Muslim community have an appetite for diversity of thought? And do we actually respect legitimate, credible differences within the ummah?
I was going to say, what do you think is what's at the core of the issue? What's the crux of the matter? Why is there some objection from certain segments of our South African Muslim community to Sheikh Omar Suleiman, for instance? But you actually touched on it now, that perhaps there is not enough of an appetite for diversity. But just to get into some more details, I know you've had the opportunity of meeting with Imam Omar Suleiman. What would you say, like your analysis, especially since you're in Johannesburg, I'm in Cape Town, and this also touches on the diversity of thought in South Africa. Cape Town and Johannesburg has very different vibes. I think we're all aware of this. So having your finger on the pulse of what's happening up country, so to speak, what would you say is like the main points of contention for those segments of our community that object to having someone like Imam Omar Suleiman in our country or platforming him by our organizations?
Alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity of speaking briefly. I must emphasize that speaking briefly to Sheikh Omar Suleiman yesterday, actually. And I had the opportunity of speaking to him briefly, but I attended the public events, and I have been following the work that Yaqeen does for a number of years. And what I've been observing is that, especially now attempting to play in the media space, is that perception is everything. And, for example, in the media space, things can be made to look one way when it's something completely different. What I observed was a sincere individual trying to do his da'wah, trying to do his khidmah to the ummah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think, for example, perceptions, because of the way things are sometimes presented, and there's unintended consequences, does create some negative vibes, unfortunately. And I think that as community is that we need to start to be looking beyond just what is apparent. And we need to have that husnul dhan about other Muslims, that good opinion about other Muslims, and making that 70 different excuses before we condemn anyone. This is what I personally feel, right? That doesn't mean to say that I agree completely, for example, what, in the case of Sheikh Omar Suleiman, I probably will have my differences of opinion with him, or any other visiting scholar, or international scholar, or local scholar. This is natural. This is human nature. This is the way of life. But I feel what happens often is that if we are very closeted and we're only exposed to one thing, a person can fall into that trap of thinking that this one thing is everything. And when you come across people who are doing things differently, then it's like, oh, it's wrong, because there's a black and white mentality where adabul ikhtilaf, the ethics of disagreement, they only exist, in our beautiful books within the Islamic scholarly tradition. They find very little or no expression in real life, because we're all influenced by this, quick bait cancel culture that we see on social media and in online debating forums, and we think that, what, real life needs to be like that.
Yeah, I had to let Sheikh Anwar cook there because I see you were getting on a on a nice roll, and so I feel sorry to interrupt that now. But I would ask, do you think the main issues that we are facing in terms of how we accommodate international scholars or international Islamic media personalities, is the main obstacle to that in South Africa? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a fiqh issue, like a legitimate fiqh issue? Or is it a manhaj, like a Islamic methodology issue? I have my own opinions on that, but I'm interested to hear yours, Sheikh Anwar, because like I said, you've got your finger on the pulse, so to speak, in the place where most of the activities are happening and where most of the sort of strong opinions are seem to be coming from. So what do you think? Is it like is the mainly a cultural thing, or does the lack of accommodation stem from like legitimate fiqh issues, or where does it come from?
Firstly, I'd like to say that I think that everybody's sincere. That's my husnul dhan, my good opinion that I'm having of my fellow brothers and sisters across the ummah, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of different issues in my opinion. So there may be legitimate, credible, authentic, fake differences, uh, between the various schools of thought, and also within the various schools of thought. I think there are methodological issues that are at play. There may be cultural issues that are at play. I always like to keep in mind, something, think globally when acting locally. You know, because we're not living in very isolated communities anymore. We are living in a globalized village, and I think
Shirano,
that
do you mind if I interrupt you? Can you
yeah.
elaborate on that concept? Can you elaborate on that concept of think globally while acting locally?
Well, for me, thinking globally when acting locally is like one. Um, Definitely keeping abreast, of what's happening in the world, and factoring in what's happening in the world when acting locally. So, for example, if in my local community, let's say the issue would be like, as an example, if there's a lack of youth programs, right? Why can't I draw on the successful programs that are hosted in other Muslim communities, perhaps in other continents, uh, and try to replicate it here? Why can't I look at, for example, their strengths, their weaknesses, and try to, build those strengths into our local programs? For me, it's also about the idea of, what are the challenges that are perhaps emerging in, let's say we take the United States of America, or we take the West as an example, because we're living in a world where, for example, the trendsetters right now of the global culture is very much still a Western culture. Perhaps you'll agree
Yeah,
with me, right? And
yeah,
so it appears sometimes as if like the English speaking Western world sometimes they're facing challenges before it hits the rest of the Muslim community. And it's very interesting to observe how they respond and how they engage those challenges. So, basically looking ahead almost, okay, what have they been doing, how they're responding, where they're succeeding, where they're failing. For me, that is like thinking globally when acting locally. I mean, for example, the idea of taking 40 hadith, right, on a particular topic. And we know the idea of 40 hadith is very strong within the Islamic tradition, particularly within the hadith sciences, the idea of a collection of 40 hadith on a particular topic, the famous being, Imam and Nawawi. This is something that's, like you find it in many, many subjects, right? Imam Omar Suleiman came up with 40 hadith on justice. I found under this collection a little while back. I took it in the Islamicity civic leadership program for high school students. We took it and we said, okay, can we take this and contextualize it for, South Africans? And we started to experiment with it, in a sense, okay, these are the hadith of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is the way it's explained. What are the South African examples that we can use to teach, for example, young students, what does it mean to actually stand for justice? So those are kind of examples of thinking globally when acting locally.
Yeah, I just having someone like Imam Omar Suleiman in South Africa, it reminded me of actually a movie that I watched recently. Not No fiqh ruling from me. I'm not trying to advocate watching films, or I don't want to get into any of those discussions, but there's a movie now out. It's called G20. So it's on Amazon. But I was just interested in it because South Africa holds the G20 presidency currently. And so I thought I want to see what these people are trying to, what's the objective with this film? What portrait are they trying to paint? And it was pretty much what I expected. They had like this, the American president is visiting South Africa, and then there's like a hostile takeover, basically. All of the heads of the different nation states get basically kidnapped and they get held hostage by this terrorist group. But basically in there, they drop subtle hints that South Africa is an inexperienced country. They need to take extra precautionary measures to ensure the president's safety, because South Africa doesn't have the capacity to handle an event like this. So they're subtly like jabbing South Africa throughout the movie. And I felt, having someone like Omar Suleiman in South Africa, there could be those kind of perceptions about South Africa not being able to accommodate an American presence, on our shores. And I think some of it stems from an inferiority complex that we have because, like you mentioned, Sheikh Omar, there's the thought leaders in the world at the moment tend to be from the Anglosphere and from America, basically. America, Australia, the United States, Canada, the UK. So there's like kind of an inferiority complex where we might feel we're not worthy of having someone like that on our shores, or that we're going to bungle it somehow, that our organizations aren't equipped to adequately deal with someone like that and give them the proper treatment. What do you think? Do you think that's part of the problem? Do you think there is that kind of inferiority complex, that there's like a concern that we're not good enough to really give someone like Imam Omar Suleiman a good time in South Africa and show him like what we have to offer?
Nah, I disagree with you there. The reason being is that, for example, South Africa has produced wonderful scholars, high-level scholars, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
We know, for example, our own teacher, the late Maulana Sheikh Taha Karan, rahimahullah, was one such scholar, but there's also others as well. The fact, for example, that there are scholars from Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, that receive amazing receptions in many other parts of the world. And South Africa is recognized also as being one of those countries in which, to study Islam outside of the Arab world, it's definitely, one of the foremost destinations outside of the Arab world. Hundreds or thousands of of scholars from other parts of the world were actually trained in South Africa. You and I
Yeah,
know
I
this
mean,
for a fact.
I went to Darul Uloom with like a lot of guys from Malaysia. So Malaysia is a Muslim country. It's a
Yeah,
lot of the Muslims in Cape Town come from that part of the world, but they came here to study Islam. So like you and I, we're familiar with that concept,
right.
right? But why do I feel like the average South African doesn't know that? Like, why does it feel like we don't know the capacity that we have and the greatness that we have in this country?
Well,
Am I like
just,
not in
just
touch
like
or?
sometimes, ulama may not have an insight to what happens at universities, and it's very easy to quickly assume, the worst things are happening at universities automatically. It's also true that those that have never studied Islam beyond, you know, maybe the local afternoon maktab madrasa and have not, or tahfidh al-Quran, hifz of the Quran, and have never entered into a Darul Ulum, it's very easy for them to assume any type of thing happening within the Darul Ulums. There is basically an ignorance from both sides of society about the other. Um,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't have, for example, the privilege that you and I have had of having been in both institutions, been both at a university, studied something, graduated, and went on into traditional Islamic studies, studied, graduated, and continuing to study and having, basically an insight into how both worlds operate. Most people don't have that, and it's understandable why they don't have that. Uh, South Africans are renowned for our hospitality. It was even mentioned at the event uh, here in Johannesburg by one of the organizers, saying that, what, the best hospitality that they've ever received has been from South Africa for, whenever they've visited, irrespective of how many countries they've visited, the best reception has been in South Africa in terms of, because our people are very hospitable, alhamdulillah. So
Was
it's
this
not a
was this Sheikh Omar Suleiman's first time in South Africa?
no, I believe it's actually his
Hmm.
second time. He would have come in
Oh,
2016 for
okay.
there was a marriage conference, I believe. He attended during that period, and the organizer of the event, the tour, Heritage Tours, they mentioned, for example, the best reception that they've received uh, anywhere in the world has been in South Africa. So I don't think it's a problem of us not knowing how to host, international scholars. We've hosted many international scholars over the years, and it's not just a new phenomenon. It's something that stretches back even, I think, maybe 50, 60, even 70 years. So many great scholars and personalities have visited our shores. But what's happening, perhaps, is that we're becoming a bit, the fact, unfortunately, as the world is growing, supposed to be growing wider in its vision, it seems like that there's segments in South African Muslim community that's becoming, unfortunately, more cloistered. Um, and that
Mm.
seems to be a problem because if our communities are becoming more cloistered, what does it mean in the face of when the entire ummah is literally under attack? Who's bearing the brunt of it is people like in Gaza and so forth. And our response is not, greater solidarity with the ummah. Rather, it's like, just distance yourself, distance yourself, distance yourself. And based on what? Unfounded claims?
But just to get back to, ulama and who is an alim and what roles ulama occupy in our society. Like one of the claims that was made recently in South Africa, and this is to get back to Imam Omar Suleiman, was that Imam Omar Suleiman is not a scholar. Um, so maybe let's unpack that. You know, who determines who is a scholar or not? Are there different sets of criteria from different schools or different manhages, different approaches? Who is it peer? Is it like a peer recognition system? Who dictates who's a scholar or not? And do we take claims like this seriously or not?
Being a student of the sciences, what we see, at least in our country, compared to other parts of the world, is that what determines a scholar is essentially your teachers, having credible teachers, uh, who are the students of credible teachers, who themselves are the students of credible teachers, an entire chain of narration of one generation of men and women training the next generation, passing on the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah and its associated sciences down basically an entire line of multiple generations of students. And this is documented through the ijazat and asanid system, basically the traditional permission system. And as people that have inherited things from our teachers in terms of ijazat and asanid, this is how we are recognized. Yes, it can be institutionalized in the form of our madrasas. We see that, right? But in other parts of the world, where, for example, an alim is a university graduate that went to basically an Islamic university, went into a certain faculty, studied for X amount of years. In Saudi Arabia, you can come out with a BA in Sharia in 4 years. That's assuming that you know Arabic, right? Whereas
Yeah.
at Al Azhar, if you wanted to go the route of studying, you would have to start studying from high school, and that journey itself can take up to 10 years, right? We know, for example, in Yemen, in Tarim, the very famous Darul Mustafa Institute, where, for example, one of our visiting scholars that came recently to South Africa, Sheikh Mus'ab Pen, found their programs vary in length from 5 years to 10 years. It's a long process, and it's also essentially it's not a university degree, so to say. It's a traditional qualification. So, in my opinion, if we are going to think globally while acting locally, then we can't say that an alim or an alima is only a person that came out of one particular system. Whether that system
Yeah.
be Manhaj al-Azhar, the al-Azhar methodology, or they came out of the Dars Nizami system, or they came out of perhaps a different system. Because the world is so vast, and we are expected as believers to be also very, very open-minded, we should be able to recognize others who have had legitimate, credible training, but come out of a different system. There's no reason to be bigoted.
Do you feel like part of the problem is that in South Africa, in many sectors of society, the Darsin Nizami is considered sacrosanct. Like the Darsin Nizami is almost like it's tanzil. It's like something that came down from the sama, and it cannot be challenged at all. And if you're not qualified within that system, then you do not qualify as an alim. Do you think that sentiment still has traction in South Africa, or is it kind of losing traction?
Maybe difficult to say, but I think in certain quarters, yes. Within and in certain quarters, no. I think, for example, amongst the general population of Muslims in the country, they don't even know about these systems, the Dars Nizami and so forth, right? They don't even know about the existence of such things. They pay no attention to it. So for the general population, this doesn't matter, right? For those that have seen beyond just the system that they were trained in, whether it be the Azhar system, the system in Yemen, the system in the Dars Nizami system, those who have seen beyond that system, those particular systems, they easily can recognize the good of other scholars and their worth and the worth of their training. And obviously, for those that have not, unfortunately, they don't see and they don't recognize and acknowledge, that others come out of other systems and there's good in this, there's good to benefit from it. I'm
Uh,
hoping that sentiment is actually receding. I'm hoping that we're
yeah,
becoming more, large-hearted to actually embrace Muslims that were trained in Muslim scholars that were trained in various
more
ways.
charitable, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I've got a story, like something I heard in Cape Town was it's an old guy used to make Jumu'ah at Aspeling Street in District 6, and they used to call that the Shafi Mosque. And then there was down the road, there's Muir Street, Zinatul Islam, which was called the Hanafi Mosque. And at the Shafi Masjid, this was the masjid that was for years the Imam had been Sheikh Shakir Hamildin, who was an Azhari graduate. And this one day, I was speaking to this old uncle. I think he overheard me. Actually, I think he overheard me speaking to someone else, and I was mentioning some Maulana in Strand, right? And this guy says, "Hier in die Kaap was ons segte gewees. Ons was segte. Waar kom julle met die Maulana goed? Los daai vir die môre." So that's a translation. He said basically, in Cape Town we used to be sheikhs. And then now you came with this Maulana business. Leave that for the Indians. That's not for us. We sheikhs. Because there used to be in Cape Town, obviously, this affiliation and loyalty to basically Al Azhar and also Makkah, various institutes in Makkah, and I guess to a lesser extent, Yemen as well, like the Ba Alawi tradition. That's gained more popularity recently. But there was this feeling of we are, we only respect people who dress a certain way, who are like Azaris, who come back with a big the nice abaya. And this Maulana thing is something new to us. And now it's sort of, I guess, 50-50, or actually more, even the Dars in Nizami has kind of taken over Cape Town to an extent. But yeah, I think that mindset is receding, but it's still an obstacle because I mean we still have people saying things like Omar Suleiman is not a scholar, don't listen to him. Um, so we need to definitely be more charitable with how we welcome people to our shores in terms of ilm.
I recognize what you're saying, and I have to add to this here. For example, you know, consider this here, right? Um, an individual that's going to perhaps university and has a day job, right? Whatever they may do, maybe going to a college, a technical college, and they take in maybe 2 to 3 hours every day, or even half an hour to study the deen, to study Islam. And they do this for many years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And they cover significant ground. They learn the Arabic language. Even if they're not able to speak it, they're able to read text and understand. They read in text under the supervision of credible ulama for that half an hour a day. They're working through the various subjects, and it takes a long time. But after 15 years, 20 years, their knowledge base um, is significant. Do we consider that person, and their teachers recognize them? You know what, so and so has been with me for 15 years, 20 years. They come every single day, they read a few lines, they read a page. I explain it to them, they explain it back to me, they ask questions. And I'm confident in their abilities. The teacher recognizes the student. Should me, as a graduate that came out of a Dars Nizami program, right? Should I recognize that person as a scholar or not? Should I recognize them as a student of the deen or not?
If you don't, then you shouldn't recognize Imam Bukhari, you shouldn't recognize Tirmidhi, you shouldn't recognize Imam Muslim, because they didn't study in like formal institutes of knowledge. They went and sought out teachers and sat with them privately and got the ijaza, went to another one, got the ijaza. So then you're actually saying only, I only accept Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi and all of those ulama of hadith on the basis that my teachers from my system say that they are scholars. I don't judge them on their own merit.
And I think, for example, look, do we need systemization? Yes, systemization definitely helps, because, like, I mean, if I went for half an hour every day to my local doctor and I'm like, Dr. Patel, I'm going to spend half an hour with you every single day, and, you're going to teach me medicine, and I'm doing this for 20 years. And afterwards, you know, Dr. Patel, and there's many Dr. Patels, he decides to write out a little certificate for me, basically saying that I'm a doctor. Society will find this, ridiculous, incredulous. And if I start doing heart surgery inside my garage, I'm going to be arrested. Rightfully, I would be arrested, because the medical fraternity itself has a certain way of operating, right? Um, and the ulama themselves have a certain way of operating. However, the nature of Islamic studies, fortunately, is not like medicine, where it's only constrained within a certain university, or set of universities. It's much broader than that. So there's multiple ways of acquiring knowledge. And if someone doesn't graduate from your system, that doesn't discredit the fact that they also were trained, credibly trained, by people who are credible themselves. So whatever disagreements a person can have, a person's Hanafi, I'm Shafi, I'm Maliki, I'm Hanbali, I come from a different school of thought. Maybe even, since we're having the discussion, maybe even I come from, a different school of Aqidah. They're Maturidi, I'm Ash'ari, something like that. They Sufi, I'm not, right? We have like some serious disagreements between ourselves. And this is not about the disagreements of wudu. It's like some theological issues, right? Now, because of my disagreements, I must completely disregard and even rubbish the training that they received. I think that's very unsporting.
I think one of the best approaches I've heard to that sort of to that problem is from Sheikh Muhammad Waldidu, um, who says, approach the different schools of Aqidah obviously we're not casting that net extremely widely. We're not saying like except an Ismaili or Batini or something. We're saying the recognized schools of Aqidah of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So we look at the Asha'ira, the Maturidiyah, and the Atharis or the Hanbalis. Look at those not as firaq, not as different sects, but as madahib, different schools. The same way we have a charitable approach to myself as a Shafi, I have a charitable approach to a Hanafi. It's a fiqh difference. You're following a mujtahid Imam, you're following Abu Hanifa, I'm following Imam Shafi. We approach Aqidah in that same way. But I think a more sort of appropriate example for that would be in South Africa. I think maybe the difference between our Salafi brothers and Maturidis, Asha'ira, the kind of like Sufis, Sufi Salafi thing. Can we accommodate each other? And then on that note, I want to use that to sort of springboard onto something else. We know that we've had other visitors to our show as well. You've mentioned Sheikh Mus'ab Penfound from the UK originally, I believe, from Tarim, from Darul Mustafa. He's Ba Alawi in Tariqa. He's part of the Ba Alawi contingent from Yemen, from Tarim. And the Ba Alawi kind of, I guess, manhaj or way of doing things and way of practicing and I suppose presenting Islam has gained quite a bit of traction in South Africa. To me, it's nothing new from Cape Town. We've been going to the Kramat of Sheikh Yusuf for decades, and they come and visit here, and we go there for Mawalid and for all different kind of events, stickers. But I think in other parts of the country, it might be a newer phenomena, or there might be a significant growth recently in interest in people like Sheikh Habib Umar, and other members of that family, the Ba Alawi family from Yemen. So I'm not saying this as a like out of outrage or out of consternation or something, but how do we account for the growth in interest in that kind of package, if you want to call it that, like the Ba Alawi way of doing things, their functions, the style of dress. How do we account for the interest in parts of South Africa that hasn't traditionally been tied to them? How do we account for that growth in interest? Is it, is there lack of something? Are they presenting something new that people need? What do you think, Sheikh Anwar? What's the draw?
To be honest, and if I'm being fair, right, I can't speak about like the growth of the Ba Alawi tariqa or the Ba Alawi methodology. I can't speak to that. I have friends that are part of the Ba Alawi tariqa, and they are very dedicated to the school of spirituality. They take the dhikrs and the salawat and their daily routines very, very seriously. And I've attended their gatherings and found it very interesting and beneficial. But I can't speak about that. What I can say is that what happens, human nature is that we always like things that are exotic, uh, So sometimes, but there's also the thing that if you're not finding something locally, you're going to look elsewhere, So for example, when in the Islamicity civic leadership programs, when we're not finding, let's say, materials that we can use to train our cohorts on basically civil society and civil society issues from an Islamic perspective, if we're not finding materials published by our respected local ulama, we do look beyond the pond, whether it be the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. We do look elsewhere because we are living in a global village. So I think it's a case of one, people like things that are new, new to them maybe. They like things that look exotic, and perhaps also if they're not finding, fulfillment in local offerings, they will look elsewhere. And are those things necessarily wrong? I don't think so.
They've got an asl, they've got uh, ijazat, they've got asanid, they've got like a tradition that goes back. I mean, these people are ashraf at the end of the day. So I think like my question is what is it that people are not finding? What didn't people find in their local offerings that they are finding now with the Ba Alawis or with the Haba'ib? Not that I have a problem with it, I'm in favor of anything that uplifts us as an ummah spiritually and in all ways. But I feel like my personal opinion would be that there's been, I guess, in especially this is the Cape Town stereotype talking, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but like in for instance, upcountry, what we call upcountry for you, your local environment, but Johannesburg and Durban, um, there there seems to be like an emphasis on tarhib, whereas the Ba Alawis and the Haba'ib have an emphasis on targhib. So there's sort of a not a threatening tone, but there's always a very serious emphasis on the punishment of certain actions, or the an emphasis on I guess khawf, fear of Allah's punishment, more so than raja, like hope in Allah's mercy. Whereas I feel like the maybe the Ba'alawis have more the softer side, so people might be feeling, I'm fed up with these people bashing me. Like Maulana is always scaling me from the minbar. Maulvi Saab is always bashing me. I want something softer. I want like a softer landing. And they maybe get that with a Habaib. I don't know. I feel like that.
Honestly, I think this is a bit of a stereotype, to be absolutely honest, right? But yeah, what you're saying, it does resonate, but I think it's but too much of a stereotype, because you naturally, here up country, right? You're going to find, various approaches being taken, right? It seems like I said, it seems like, my opinion could be wrong, that a lot of scholars have changed, their approach, and
Yeah.
they want to, for example, engage their communities in newer and different ways, right? So for me, whether it's Yaqeen Institute, or the Ba Alawi tradition, or it's Islam 21C, whoever's the service provider that people are latching onto. Oftentimes, they seem to be foreign service providers, right? That's very interesting. Um, but for example, whatever people are latching onto, um, my approach is that, you know what, if people are not finding perhaps things in the local environment, they're going to look elsewhere. Or it may be that someone is just wired so differently that they, something, it's just appealing, so the local environment, it sees to your needs, it's really good content, it's excellent work that's being done, may Allah bless it, inshallah. But you know what, I want something different, right? The latest craze is to watch Omar Suleiman's Jannah series, right? And to interact with the online platforms. I want to be part of that. The latest craze is to wear, basically a turban that has multi layers, and to wear a shawl. And I want to be part of that. And I want to rock my tasbih or my subh, at the dhikr, right? Considering, the moral decay that we live in, if someone is excited about Islam, I'm like, like go for it, man, go for it. Because along this process, you're gonna benefit. Inshallah, you're going to come out as that better human being, to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a good way. So it's my personal, people will say, ah, this year is like too liberal. I'm not a liberalist, you know that, right? But at the end of the day, is that as long as it's authentic, considering the environment, the situation of the ummah, I'm like, go for it. I'm also aware that we're living in this global village where, for example, all our needs and wants and our curiosity may not be just satisfied by what we see around us. And is that necessarily a bad thing? I know for a fact that for many years, before even Omar Suleiman came to South Africa on this tour, before, for example, Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad came on his tour last year to South Africa, there were scholars and students who were consuming their material and using it for Jumu'ah lectures and using it for other public engagements. And the only reason why they said, they wouldn't say, I found this on Yaqeen Institute, or I found this on Seeker's Guidance, or I found this on 21C, is because they were afraid of the local backlash, from others who may not be aware of these scholars and were quick to condemn. So it's like, use the content, but never show the source, because we're afraid of our content then not being accepted.
Yeah. Sheikh Anwar, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We've had our own experience with that before,
Oh, yeah.
in 2024.
Well, our
So,
election guide, yeah, the way it was used, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
fine. We
So,
wrote it for the Ummah. Inshallah, the Ummah benefited. Inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Look, I've heard an interesting. You might also disagree with this, but I think it's a useful example. Like one of my friends who's very involved with Ba Alawi Tariqa, he goes to all of their functions, all of them, their adhkar, all of their mawalid. Um, and he told me, like, there is, I guess, a degree of like projection and like a sort of performative aspect to dressing up and, wearing the khatam ring and having the nice shawl on and the layered turban, all of that stuff. There's a performative aspect to it. But he told me also, like, there is definitely faida in fake it till you make it. And their objective with that is they want to reach sincerity in that state so that by the time they reach sincerity, then everything is perfect. They've already got the gear on and everything, but now their hearts are fixed. So I don't know, but it made sense to me, like fake it till you make it is something you can apply. And well, I mean, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu tells us, like you should pretend to cry if you can't cry. So I guess that's also one of the motivations is that the draw is like the nice presentation is appealing to young people because now and there's a lot of faida in that. I think there's a lot of benefit in that because you know young people are now looking at Islamic fashion and modest fashion in the sense of, wow, this is cool. I like
Mm.
this. I
Mm.
want to dress like that. So they are now like dressing the sunnah and enjoying it. That it's cool. It's popular. It's now not like you're wearing a turban and a kurta, and now everyone like looks at you like you're some lunatic.
This can also, be very positive for people's Islamic identity because they take in, like they're confident about their Islamic identity. They take in pride
Yeah, yeah,
in their Islamic identity. And I think this is something that the Ummah definitely really needs right now.
yeah, definitely.
So if I can add in
I'm
something,
for it.
right? Let's say, for me, this is a fiqh discussion that and I respect the various views that exist on it, right? But for communities who are already on a daily basis, they are consuming material, audio visual, consuming visual material already, whether it be pictures or whether it be footage, right? And they are not interested in the debate, of halal and haram. And I respect the views on this here, and I respect the people that hold the various views on it, but they're already consuming. Someone needs to be there in that space to offer guidance and reminders about Islam. It's very, very important. So someone has to play that role, whether we like it or not. This is a reality. Someone has to be out there at those protests in America, in many other places, and even in South Africa, that Islamic presence that says, hey, you know what? There is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the most just. We have an obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to pray our salah. We need to eat halal. We need to watch our interactions. We need to watch our dealings. We need to be careful about what form of justice, what utopia we want to create. There has to be that presence. So if it's a person like, someone is doing that and we don't like that, but it's the necessary action of the time, it has to get done. And so far as content is created, I would rather a person is spending 2 hours watching content on, for example, um, Sapiens Institute than spending 5 hours on Netflix, being basically brain draining, suffering brain rot. Because on the one, you're definitely going to benefit, and inshallah, it's going to improve your life. And on the other one, you just basically made somebody else rich in the process, and you achieved nothing for yourself. Firstly, I'd like to say Jazakallah khairah for the discussion today. I think it's much needed in terms of us framing how we welcome our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world, be they scholars or not, be they people even just visiting South Africa and visiting our local masajid. Also, how we, engage other traditions of the Muslim world. I think this is very important. And I will add also that we are students of the Islamic sciences. We respect the various madhahib that exist, whether they be in aqidah, whether they be in fiqh, and we appreciate the contributions of the ulama over the multiple generations that have contributed to this very vast, living, breathing, beautiful intellectual and spiritual tradition. We feel very honored to be students of this tradition. We are not naysayers in the Muslim community. We honor the Muslim community. This is our community. And we're just having frank discussions so that we can move our community forward. Going forward, inshallah, there will be many other discussions that we're hoping to have, and we're hoping that it will add benefit to the community by stimulating thought and respectful engagement for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.